so we can chat and we can. Hi, Joanna, how are you?
Hello, good morning. I'm fine, thank you. Thank you. We are trying to reopen and to do next steps. And inside of our association, we have few problems now. Few collections are almost closed, so we are trying to help. We are trying to help and
Joanna, how are you? Oh, sorry.
So I'm fine, thank you. Thank you. We are trying to reopen and to do next steps. And inside of our association, we have few problems now.
Sorry.
Collections are almost closed.
It's so technical problems. It's the echo of the YouTube. Okay. Now it's good. Found it. Oh my. But anyway, let's start. What do you think? Let's start our fifth webinar. And good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, UMAC community, everywhere you are. We started with these Friday webinars, 2 per Friday, more or less 1 month ago. And the aim was to share our experiences as university museum professionals as we navigated through the COVID lockdowns and closures and reopenings and reclosures. In total, we have had more than 300 university museum professionals attending the webinars from all over the world. And for the past 5 weeks, we have become used to see each other's faces, hear each other's voices, and in fact, we created a special community. And that was UMAC's real aim of these webinars all along. It was to be here for one another and to support each other in these challenging times. So today we meet for the last time, at least in this UMAC lockdown series. Our theme is the near future, and we would like to focus on the effects of COVID in our institutions, our practices, our audiences, and of course ourselves. Some of the questions we want to address are, what is the immediate and mid-term impact of COVID in your university museum and collection? What consequences do you anticipate in terms of audiences, logistics, finances, access, perhaps even mission and strategy? And we have 3 mini talks to kick off the conversation. The first is by Josh Yu, Director of the Art Museum of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Then we will have Marianne Lim, National University of Singapore, the News Museum. And then we have Zhao Ke, Director of the Electronic Science and Technology Museum of the University of Electronic Science and Technology of China. The webinar will be moderated by our colleague and friend, David Ellis from Australia, Director of the Chow Chak Wing Museum of the University of Sydney, which will inaugurate in November, and where UMAC was supposed to have had our annual conference this year. We hope to meet there in 2023, not only because the University of Sydney will have a new fantastic museum, but also because Australia has incredible university museums and collections, and perhaps even more because Australia was at the very center of the university museums and collections movement, more or less 25 years ago, when the idea of UMAC started in ICOM. So thank you so much, David. We will now start with our webinar, and over to you and to our speakers. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Marta. Hi, everyone. It's a terrific turnout. We have 15 countries represented here, and a really broad base right across the world this evening. About this evening, it's different time zones for everyone in the world. I'm calling from Australia, so it's this evening now, Friday evening. Looking forward to the weekend. A great way to start the weekend, though. We've got a presentation. We've got 3 presentations to get through. in fairly short time. This is really a wrap up of the last few weeks. As Marta said, we're going to be talking about the near future and really what does the future hold in the next few weeks and the next few months. Our first presentation is from Josh in Hong Kong. So straight over to you, Josh.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Marta. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Josh Yu from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We are at 3 p.m. right now. I think that most of you are going through similar problems as we are going through during this lockdown period. So I do not want to spend the time talking about the troubles that we are going through, but rather I would like to tell you specifically one program that we have devised over the past few weeks that we think are quite interesting and potentially important for our own community that may also be of help to some other university museums on your site. What we have done is that since mid-April, we devised an art talk series online that we launch on a weekly basis. It basically took us about 6 weeks to plan the whole flow, and we started launching it in late May on May 29th. The idea of this talk series is to differentiate our normal operations from other online lectures, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. Instead of having a curator to talk about an art object, I think that now is the time for us to engage other community members. And so what we have done is to feature a special guest for all of our episodes. And our special guests are actually not art experts, even though we are an art museum. We have invited other people from other industries to talk with our curators about 1 to 2 artworks per episode in any single episode. So for instance, we begin our series with a talk on a 1,000-year-old Buddhist sutras featuring a special guest who is currently an abbot of a Buddhist monastery. And then we have other guests to speak to us on other aspects from our collection. So 2 weeks ago, we have a hike leader to explore a landscape with us. So in other words, we are using those experts to look at our specific artworks that the curators may not notice in our planning for research or our exhibition. It has turned out to be quite successful. And we want to make sure that this online talk or lecture, whatever you want to call it, would be accessible to the general audience. So we want to make it bite-sized. So that's why each episode is only 10 minutes long. And we launch it every Friday afternoon. And in fact, the next one is coming out in about an hour and a half's time. The launch time at 4:30 on every Friday is also strategic because we think that it is the end of the week where people will feel a little bit more relaxed. And if they take 10 minutes off their work, they won't be troubled by their bosses or other people. So it has worked out to be pretty well. And then in preparation for this series, we have also planned a 30-second trailer that is launched 2 days before the launch of the video. So we have a trailer every Wednesday just to grab other people's attention. And then because the series is primarily for the local audience in Hong Kong, so the interview with our special guest is actually conducted in Cantonese Chinese with English and Chinese subtitles so that they would be accessible to the international audience as well as our colleagues in mainland China for those of them who can't understand Cantonese. May I have the next slide, please? Martha, we have the next slide. That's the last slide. The one. Yes. So the second slide will give you a quick idea on our outreach. But right now we have reached about 75,000 people, and this is for the past 5 weeks. When we have done just 5 episodes, and the numbers are growing. We have only started launching the talk series in mainland China through a Chinese platform called Bilibili. And even though the numbers are quite low at about 559 right now, but normally Chinese viewership would increase exponentially once the word starts to pick up. So we think that there is going to be an afterlife for this video series. But what the point that I want to highlight here is that although the number of 75,000 or 30,000 viewerships does not sound very high, but actually for a museum like our size, when we normally entertain about 60,000 visitors per year, 60 to 80,000 visitors per year, this represents a significant outreach at a time when the museum is not open. And one point to take up with is that the production cost for this entire series is just about 3,000 US dollars. So we think that it is a very cost-effective thing for us to do that would have a pretty respectable impact. So the final slide is, Martha, may I have the final slide, please? The main lessons that I think we have in organizing this series is that the main point is to find a very important and potentially influential special guest, whether it is a monastery abbot or a news anchor from CNBC or a well-known doctor locally. And we actually rely on their own influence to reach out to their group, and so drawing their audience into the museum orbit. We think that that is a good way to go, but we have to make sure that we give them the right flow of questions to begin with, so that they know what they are getting themselves into, because most of them are actually non-art experts. So many of them actually feel uncomfortable to talk with us about works of art. But once we reassure them that this is not to ask them about their opinions of art, but really to ask their own experience in working on other aspects that may tangentially relate to art, then they become much more open-minded. And then the response has been quite good generally. Two good things that have come out from this is that we have had very good response from the university senior management, because oftentimes, university vice chancellors or the associate pro vice chancellor normally only come to our museum openings or they attend special events. But for a bite-sized video series like this, many of them have actually watched all of the 10-minute videos, and then they even wrote back and said, wow, this is very interesting. In fact, they want to use this as a marketing campaign for the university at large. So we think that this is a potentially win-win situation for both the university museum and also for our own museum. And then another good thing is, of course, is that it is a good way for us to stay in touch with our existing donors. And we have also used this as a platform to knock on the doors of our potential donors. Of course, we are not in a position to say that we have secured major grants or funds from our potential donors yet, but it is a good way to let them know that we are still trying to make headways, even in this period of presumed low productivity. And finally, one interesting thing is that I think in this whole process where our curators have a chance to work with other experts from other industries, we actually learned something new about our own collection. So that was a really satisfying experience for us. So that's what I would like to share for now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. Really interesting to see innovation coming out of these times, developing new audiences. Just one quick question before we go on. Will the series continue? Is this something that you will really push into the future?
Many people have asked me that question. I mentioned earlier that the production cost for this series is only 3,000 US dollars. But if somebody were to give me $3,000 to continue to do the next series of 8 episodes, I am not going to do it. It is really a lot of work. But I see the potential that this could be a fundraising platform for my museum. So in other words, I am going to, if somebody were interested enough to say, okay, well, I am from company A and I want to be the exclusive sponsor for your next series, and then I want you to have so-and-so speakers or whatnot, I would be perfectly be open to it. But then I would ask them for much more money for sponsorship. That would cover the exam.
Very good. We'll move straight. We will have the opportunity for more questions later. We'll move straight on to Marianne Lim's presentation. So over to you, Marianne.
Hello. So I'm Marianne from the Animus Museum based in Singapore. So I do outreach for the museum, and I run the museum's various programs. Okay, so today I am going to be presenting on the internship program that we've been doing over these past 3 months, and it's been sustained online for all of it actually, and also as part of my job scope, I'm also managing this internship program. Yeah, so this our NUS Museum internship program, just to give you a little introduction, it has been running for the past 10 years, and it's quite a big part of what we do here at the NUS Museum. So we offer the internship over the May to July holidays, which is the so-called summer holidays, although it's potentially summer all year long here, and the December holidays as well. So due to the COVID situation, I think a lot of internship programs at major museums were actually cancelled. So however, we decided to go ahead because the internship program is pretty much a cornerstone of the work that we do here. And as such, we received over 200 applications for 7 positions across the curatorial, collections, and outreach arms of the museum, which is a really large pool of applications. Usually we get about over 100, but this time it was pretty, I think, inflated because of the situation that we're in right now. So currently, we are into our 3rd month of the internship, and we have 9 interns in total for 7 positions. So some of the positions have 2 or 3 interns, for that one position. So I think something important that I want to just highlight is that our internship program includes supervisor-specific tasks across the various arms of the museum. So we have curatorial interns, collections interns, and outreach interns, but it also includes a parallel program that is focused around a particular mode of inquiry or text, and usually pertains to key issues in museology that supplements the interns' learning. So this year, we're focusing on a conference publication from 1995 titled Space, Spaces, and Spacing. So what we want to do is look into the histories and discussions around alternative art spaces in Singapore, and to see how they have evolved over the last 25 years. And to see how these histories then have bearings on the ways that our art spaces have been carved out in contemporary Singapore. We're also looking into being more experimental with art learning and teaching, so that rather than being didactic in our way of in our education, we are trying to encourage our interns to take their learning into their own hands and to draw their own connections and find their own learning processes. So what I've done for this iteration of the internship program is to build a mini curriculum of sorts around the conference publication that includes certain guiding themes and topics. So for instance, we had a roundtable around virtual spaces. We also had like a brainstorming session where the interns were to come up with like a sort of mood board around what their ideal space is. And these come in varying formats as well, of like roundtables, brainstorming sessions, presentations, talks, and so on. So as we have no access to the museum during this entire COVID period, we've had to conduct the internship program entirely online. So I've never actually met any of my interns in person yet, which is a very strange situation to be in. But so here on this slide, I've outlined the 3 main digital platforms that we've been using to support our internship program and to ensure that it is as robust as it can be. So just to briefly run through it, we've been using Zoom naturally for any group meetings that we have. So these include the weekly sessions as part of the parallel program that we have, any casual hangouts, talks with external speakers where they call into the Zoom meeting, and virtual tours, which I will touch upon in the next slide. We also use Microsoft Teams. So our university has a corporate account with Microsoft Teams. So this one is used more for individual tasks with supervisors. So Microsoft Teams can hold chats and even calls. And it's usually used more for day-to-day communications. Like if you're a supervisor, you want to ask your intern like, oh, where is so-and-so file? You can just chat across using Microsoft Teams. And I also use it for general announcement blasts. The last thing that we're using is this thing called Notion. I'm going to talk about it a lot in the next 2 slides. It's basically a co-working space where we've done scheduling and announcements on it, but it's great because it's also collaborative. It has collaborative functions that enable group work, and it's really good for information storage and dissemination as well. So I'll elaborate a lot more on Notion in the next slide, which we can move on to. Yep. So I guess some highlights and adaptations that are quite important that we've been doing for this internship program. So while Zoom and Teams is almost a direct replacement of our usual day-to-day communications and meetings, I think there are 2 big steps that we've moved towards that cannot exactly be classified as replacements. So firstly is the virtual tour. So usually we offer our interns an in-depth tour of both the NUS Baba House, which is a heritage museum house that we own as well, as the NUS museum itself. However, since the interns cannot be on the premises, we had to make do by doing the tour virtually. So using Zoom, the museum staff will who's giving the tour will then bring the camera through the space using like a gimbal stabilizer. And this is also interspersed with PowerPoint presentations that are flashed on screen to view objects in greater detail or to highlight certain phrases or words or things that are not tangible within the displays itself. And this was particularly helpful for us since we've been thinking of doing other kinds of virtual tours for our programming moving forward. So it served as a useful test run with the interns to see what works and what does not. The second thing is Notion. And it's probably the biggest thing that we are using for the internship program. I'm going to caveat that I'm not a Notion salesperson in disguise, but like Notion is really great. I cannot stop talking about how great it is because it's really incredible all-in-one workspace. And usually digital digital work and files are scattered across various platforms, right? So if you want to have work boards, I don't know if you've seen it before, like Kanban boards, you'll use something like Trello. If you want to do PowerPoints or writing documents and PDFs, you use Google Drive and the various Google tools. If you want to have a calendar, you use Outlook. But all these things are scattered across very, very different platforms. But Notion is able to consolidate all these things onto one platform where you can even embed videos, images, articles, your own files, even Google Docs and slides. And it's great for collaborative work and has its own built-in calendar functions and so on. So if you see on this slide here, on the top right-hand corner, it's a little small, but so a workspace board in Notion. It kind of functions a little bit like a web page. So there's a home page, which consolidates all other kinds of pages that you put on it. So for instance, you can have pages linking to resources, the calendar, work, and so on. And we also put together a museum directory, which you can see on the bottom right corner. Yeah, because the interns won't get to see the museum team in person, right? Usually this happens your office, you kind of get to know faces and people. But yeah, here the museum directory serves that function for the interns to kind of be initiated to who is working in the museum, even if you don't get to see these people all the time. The calendar function is also very useful, and from here the interns know when the parallel program sessions are or when any of the other activities are. And lastly, and quite importantly, there is this other work tool called Miro, which is integrated into Notion. So Miro helps with brainstorming activities, which we've been doing a lot of with the interns in this program. So it functions exactly like a physical workspace, you know, like let's say if you have an A1 paper, and then like you put sticky notes, and you know, in a group you can start working and drawing like mind maps and so on. So Miro does this but digitally, and it can be embedded straight into Notion. Could we go to the last slide, please? Okay, so I guess that being said, as we're in our third and final month of the internship right now, there are some key takeaways from our experiences with hosting an online internship that I would like to share with all of you. And I think which might be helpful if we continue these discussions of moving forward with museum education over digital platforms. So I think firstly, is the importance of physical presence, and this is something that we've picked out on. Yeah, so I think there are a few points here. That one, there's in general a difficulty in moderating discussions and maintaining a level of engagement. I think also because like, well, the interns don't know each other very well. And this links to the second point, right? There's a lack of organic group cohesion amongst the cohort of interns. So, and because of this, it's a little bit difficult to try to get them to engage or like to speak up more when we are moderating the different sessions with them. And also because they don't have that kind of like rapport or relationships that have been built between each other yet. So we've attempted to boost group cohesion, and this includes like getting them to work in groups, these like lunch hangouts, or like these weekly things we call pantry chats that we have on Friday evenings, where we just you know, talk about various things yeah, with the interns. But it doesn't quite replace the kind of rapport that is organically built when you're physically present to each other. And the last thing also quite important to me is that they have no access to hands-on components. So usually for the internship programs, we will offer a conservation workshop, but because yeah, we don't have access to the museum nor the tools that are in the museum that are used for conservation, this couldn't go ahead for this iteration of the internship. Yep. And so, but the second thing also that I want to point out is the effectiveness of Notion. So yeah, so all that being said, Notion has really been like a work tool powerhouse for us. So it not only consolidates the components of the parallel internship program for us. I think this is important, that it's not a replacement, but it enhances this sort of experimental art learning that we're trying to do here at the museum, because it greatly enables collaboration and generates responses even beyond the stipulated program sessions that are held weekly. So in between sessions, the interns also can continue to work on their various boards or mind maps based on what they have been learning with their individual supervisors in their individual supervisor-based tasks, and respond to each other. So the learning isn't just isolated to the days that we have the sessions, but it's continued all throughout the entire program. Yeah. And so when it's complemented by the functions like Teams, you know, where we have like day-to-day communications, is greatly enhanced. So I think moving forward, yeah, I would just like to highlight again that I do think that the physical component cannot be replaced at times, or at least replacement probably isn't the thing that we're looking for here. But moving forward, it's more of how we can meaningfully work with both digital assets and our usual physical ways of working to enhance our work processes. So for instance, right now what we're looking at is how we can guide virtual tours towards a specific direction. So for instance, they can all be like 5-minute shorts, curator-led introductions that will help for our online content, but at the same time, audiences will still be intrigued enough to want to come for the actual physical museum tours itself. Yeah, and the same thing for the internship program, right? So we'll definitely continue to use Notion and Teams, even if our next internship cycle, we can all be back in the office. And this is because I think Notion is able to sort of bridge these like physical components with the digital components. So for instance, even if they do brainstorming on a physical piece of paper, they can take a picture of it, upload it onto Notion, and then we can still consolidate everything there. Yeah, and I guess we do have some further questions that we're still thinking about, and we have no answers, easy answers to now. So I guess moderation online is still very tough, and I don't think this is a problem that's going to go away in the next few months. So how do we build these sorts of rapport with individuals, when we can only meet them online or digitally? And also the other question, which I think was raised in the previous sessions, like how do we accommodate for students who do not have such good access to technology? Because I think we've been very lucky to have students who do have access to technology and be in a country that has pretty decent bandwidth, I would say. Yeah, so I think one thing that I didn't highlight earlier is that technological issues wise, one thing that we've been trying is to mix pre-recorded elements with live components. So let's say for the virtual tours, we have a pre-recorded virtual tour that we will stream. And then after that, we will go on to a live like Q&A session, for instance. So that helps with a bit of the technological issues that we face. But for audiences who do not even have access to such technologies, like say older folk, for instance, it's much harder. Yeah. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. We can see there's a lot of innovation happening around the sector, a lot of agility in adapting to new circumstances. Our final speaker, our next and final speaker is Xiaoke from China. Xiaoke, are you there?
Okay, I'm here. Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I'm Xiaoke from the Electronic Science and Technology Museum from China. I would like to share some thoughts of the impact of COVID in my university museum near future. Next page, next slide, Marta, please. As we know, the pandemic brought many difficulties for our museums. Most of us temporarily closed our museums for several months. The second slide, thank you, Marta. Yes. No. Last one, sorry. The second page.
Wait.
Back.
Yeah, wait. Okay, let's start.
Okay. I just saw the screen of the YouTube, so there's a delay.
There is a delay, it's good.
Yes, this one.
This one, right, here we go. Hey, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So most of us maybe temporarily closed our museums for several months. Financial problems, access detection problems came one after another. As I know, some museums even closed forever. So for now, while maintaining the basic operations, we just want to look forward. During the lockdown, I think we all tried to use some new technologies to move everything online for our audience. Virtual tour, MOOC, live cast, and online education activities were implemented. So opportunities also emerged in response to these attempts. The online activities have led to more diversified needs of the audience and more personalized audiences. The increasing needs for subdivided fields makes the demand distribution show a trend kind of power law distribution. Next slide, please, Marta. I personally believe that under the trend of diversification and personalization, whether it is the individual's cultural needs, the individual's income in the society, or the resources available to the museum, there is a change from a normal distribution to a power law distribution. That is possibly maybe 80% of the mainstream in the past. As long as you work hard, you can get 80% of the wealth, reaching an average level. In the future, only the top 10 may obtain 90% of the resources, and the bottom 90% may only open the remaining 10% of the resources. It seems like individuals with personality and independent thinking idea will not be replaced by AI in the future. In the future, we just need unique museums. For us, Electronic Science and Technology Museum, we better strengthen our features. Firstly, because our museum is a new museum just opened in 2016, very new. Secondly, the average age of our staff is just 29 years old. We are young. So our goal has always been to make good use of technologies, such as 5G and AI technologies, keep every colleague motivation and promote the development of university museums and science museums. Sometimes we discuss the advantages and the disadvantages of technology. Someone like it, or some others may hate them. Any coin has both sides. In my opinion, we should bravely embrace them, embrace the technologies, know its borders, its their limits, expand them, and reduce the blind spots in order to better control it and use them to serve museums. Next slide, please, Martha. And here's is an example of us. We always want feedback from the audiences, but how? Before 4G time, the first generation, second generation, the third generation electronic communication, we just use questionnaires, interviews like this, these methods to get the feedback from the audience. When we use 4G, some museums obtain audiences preference data from apps, from audience guides, some machines like that. And the 5G is coming now. We are in our museum, we are developing an exhibition evaluation and optimization system based on deep learning and micro expression recognition. Face recognition is now relatively mature. Basically, more than 95%, everyone knows that. We use face recognition to pay. But in terms of micro expressions, my research team now uses 5 expressions of happiness, anger, exhausted, and so on as the scale. And the emotion recognition rate can reach 75%. It is not that high, but we continue to improve it. And we plan to conduct tests to get the audience's direct feeling of the exhibition and the connection, and use AI technology to perform data calculation and judgment to help us evaluate and optimize the exhibition and connection. We will try to keep data secure and solve other problems, exploring the boundaries of the museum. So those are what I want to say about near future, during lockdown and after lockdown. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xiaoke. Really using technology in amazing new ways. Wow. And that really is, the innovative ways looking forward. So that's the end of our 3 speakers. Let's throw it open to everyone. What are your immediate and midterm impacts? What does the future hold for you? Are these long-term impacts or just of the moment? What are the financial pressures? We know there's a lot of financial pressures on universities in Australia, for example. We don't know exactly what yet, but we know it's coming and we'll have to adapt. So throwing it open, who wants to share? Everyone's being very quiet. What about from other parts? We've heard from parts of Asia. What about from other parts of the world?
Perhaps
Morning,
I can-
everybody.
Oh,
Hello.
it's okay.
Sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
No, go right ahead.
No, just to say hello, I'm Anna. I'm from the UK. I work at the University of Reading for the Museum of English Rural Life. And thank you ever so much for the whole series, actually. It's been wonderful. It's been great to be part of. And the speakers this morning, really inspirational and really interesting. The point that I was just going to make, and just to pop up and say hello, was that I'm at the moment just looking at the real practicalities and the nitty-gritty of reopening, and that is it's overwhelming. Actually, I'm looking at sort of risk assessments and, you know, what toilets get used by the public and by staff and those sorts of things. So although obviously everything that's been shared this morning is fantastic, very innovative, I think it's just worth sort of, you know, putting there that there's a huge amount of logistical and practical things that we're all needing to consider as well. And that because obviously it's public health situation, because we're thinking about colleagues and volunteers in the public, it's there's those things that feel like they're really pressing and, as I say, sort of slightly overwhelming at the moment. So it's the practical things as well as the wonderful intellectual things that that feel, you know, we really need some real attention at the moment.
Thank you, Anna. How have other people found that? Are we looking at simply the getting by over the next few months? Are there longer term changes in the way we're going to operate our museums? What is this impact going to look like? And I think it's going to vary from country to country. So perhaps we could hear from other countries now.
If I may give an opinion from South Africa, we are still very much at the start of the pandemic. So we have shut down early, thereby actually basically delayed the pandemic. And now as the economy is starting to reopen and so on, we actually still have a long way ahead, because it is only now that the infections are actually rising. So we are at over 8,000 infections, new infections a day now, which is a number that keeps on rising and keeps on rising, especially in the densely populated areas such as Gauteng, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, with Port Elizabeth, the townships and so on. What it means for the museums is, even though the public museums are now in the level 3 of the national lockdown, allowed to reopen, which we heard last Friday, it's actually not ideal. The University of Pretoria, where our museum is located, still remains shut. We continue with distance learning, online exams, and that kind of thing. The students are not yet really allowed back onto campus. So it also means that we can't really open the museums if the university is still closed. And we believe that we might be put back into a higher lockdown level, which means there is a chance that, or it is a fear that a lot of people are experiencing right now, that because of the rising numbers, we are actually going back into a deeper shutdown. And that is a realistic possibility. So we still have a long way ahead. We are working on reopening considerations right now, thinking of what we actually can, fund, because the funds need to come out of our own operational budget in order to provide personal protective equipment for the staff and hand sanitizers at the entrances, and thinking about one-way routes where people don't get into too much contact with each other, maintaining social distancing, but not spending too much money on a phase that might actually not be that long. We've heard from some of the other museums overseas that they have not necessarily had a long period where they implemented personal protective equipment. And a lot of museums in Europe seem to not use masks or anything in closed rooms anymore, or bigger galleries. So these considerations need to be weighed off on each other. But the situation in our country might be different. We might be in a lockdown and with stricter regulations for much longer than other countries in the world. So the future is still insecure.
I think that wraps up a lot of our experiences. For example, in Australia, there's been thankfully, very low death rates, but we just noticed a small spike in infections in Melbourne, and that might well close down the recently opened museums. So it's very much a wait and see. I'm wondering if let me share you one thing. We're about to open a new museum. You were all going to come to see it at the UMAC 2020 conference, which was cancelled. The new museum was to include some wonderful, innovative touch screens, all put on hold now as we consider the next 6 months and the likelihood of using touch screens and our public's appetite to use touch screens. The museums are opened in Australia, but with quite social distancing and restrictive sort of practices. No object-based hands-on learning at the moment in university museums in Australia. So how about other countries? Any more that we can share with our whole group? Have museums opened in Hong Kong? Josh?
Yes, the museums have reopened in Hong Kong.
They
Our
have.
museum actually opened several weeks ago on June 13th, but most museums have already opened in May. Yeah.
Okay. And Hong Kong was going through the COVID quite early. Do you sense you're coming out of that, and therefore there's that sense of optimism?
I think the mood here is generally people are eager to get out because they have been stuck indoors for so long. But on the other hand, I think on the whole, Hong Kongers are quite conscientious of of social distancing. So that really helps. And I think that in contrast to many other places, our visitors, when they come in with their own masks and they bring their own hand sanitizers. So even though we provide the same things on our counter, but it's not as though these things will get used up very quickly. But we are still testing to see how it goes, because as Nicole said earlier, I mean, these are things that we have to provide on our own without additional operational budgets.
Certainly the impact on budgets is very pronounced. Those that rely on visitor-generated income are suffering. And within our own host universities, I feel that there's going to be a wave of pain in our financial situations. Has anyone got anything to share in that space? We all know how sometimes marginalized museums and collections can be within the broader university. It's always I know in Australia, it's a constant, sometimes a struggle to get our voices heard and embedded into the university's strategic plans. And therefore that we can be vulnerable to these times. Can anyone share any experiences there that might be willing to share? I don't expect financial information, but is there any impact so far?
I can say a few words, David. I think that universities themselves are still figuring out, and governments, if we go up the scale, are still figuring out, even because probably they can't really say anything about at this point, you know, of how, especially museums that depend on public budget. Well, you mentioned the income from visitors, but that is going to decline inevitably. So we are sure about it. Regarding the, you know, the recognition of our museums and of the importance of museums and culture, I think that actually there will be probably some funding for digitization and online activities, because it's for the cultural sector in general. Okay, so we have to be smart in order to profit those opportunities, to be attentive, because I think that on the one hand, it's true that audiences have been away, but on the other hand, we never saw so much culture directly brought to people's homes, you know, and many museums were not prepared. So I think there will be some funds to explore more digital opportunities for museums, and digitization of collections which were not accessible online. And again, you know, some money to for that, you know, to operate online, to do more activities online. I think there will be in general for the cultural sector. In terms of our universities, I think that we'll have to see, because it depends on the decline on the number of students. So we're so dependent on so many factors, and students are not going back. So yeah, foreign students, for example, the impact of foreign students in all universities all around the world, you know, it's just massive. And so we will have to see. But in general, if we look at history, and if I may say some words of hope, if we look at history, university museums have not suffered so much when there is financial crisis. You know, they kind of tend to stagnate. They may close, but they're not destroyed, dismantled, and so on. They are destroyed, dismantled when there's a lot of money for universities, because that's when they want to build, expand new labs, new computer. So we kind of in a counter cycle. And I think that there are more opportunities for the cultural sector. So yeah, there might be some uncertainty, but in the long run, I think that we will come out of this okay. I don't know if I can
Very
predict.
good words. And hearing about over the past 5 sessions, we've heard a lot about innovation and adaptation and agility. We're often quite small operations, and that actually has its own benefits, and that we can adapt, we can be agile, we can listen to our users and create new audiences this way. So yeah, I guess it's what we make of it.
And in fact, we just heard 3 incredible experiences of how university museums are, on the one hand, less prepared. Okay, collections are not online and so on. You know, the traditional functions of museums, we are kind of lagging behind in general, okay? But in terms of platforms, in terms of innovation, if we are smart to use the university infrastructure and the university know-how and expertise and the students and, you know, and IT, it's just crazy what Zauke presented. It's just amazing. Which is the museum outside a university that can do a thing like that? Very few, you know, even the national museums, very few. Because first of all, one, they don't have courage, they're kind of afraid and so on. And we deal with, you know, braveness all the time and experimental stuff all the time, you know. So I think that we will come out of this much better, in terms of it pushes us to do something that we, you know, were not forced before, and we were doing like normal things, but now we have really to do different things, and we can.
And that's probably a good way to finish the sessions. Thank you, Marta. And thank you, Marta, and to the board of UMAC for initiating this series. I get a sense that I think this is probably should be regular, maybe not every week, but certainly regular get-togethers would be a great thing. And I think in 6 months, a year's time, to look back and say, wow, look how we've changed and adapted, and the positive stories that come out would be a valuable thing to do. So shall we wrap up? Or, well, let me throw it open. Any more questions, anything else anyone else wants to share? But otherwise, I think we'll wrap it up. We are right on time. So thank you everyone for all your participation. Thank you to the 3 speakers. Over to you, Marta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. You've been a wonderful moderator. Thank you to the speakers, and we say goodbye for now. And of course, since it's the first time, UMAC also went digital with these webinars, and so we're evaluating and reflecting, and you will be asked to give us some feedback about the webinars. Okay, so we're preparing a survey so that you can give us some feedback, and I'm very grateful for everything that you can tell us, because it will make us, do even better next time, which I hope, and maybe we have to anyway, to continue doing these webinars. We will also meet 27 July for the UMAC annual general meeting that will be also on Zoom for UMAC members and on YouTube Live. So I hope to see you there again. Go to our website to see how you can participate. And and some things will be announced there also in terms of new activities for 2020. And so I expect to have a large audience. And and thank you. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much.
Bye all.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, everyone.